Sometimes making a change for your physical or your mental health is, well, the best option on the table. And it was certainly the best option for Iowa football at quarterback. We'll get to that in a little bit. I'm sure it won't take us long to get to that storyline. But how about these numbers to start things out? I'm going to throw up the rushing numbers at the bottom of the screen. And everybody wants to talk about Caleb Johnson. But let me start this show by talking a little bit about Liddell Betts, because here's a guy who I don't know has gotten enough credit for what he's built here. And ironically enough, about an hour, maybe 2 hours prior to kickoff today, Iowa landed yet another Florida tailback for its 2025 class. But look at those numbers below. Caleb Johnson, 24 carries, $135, another hat trick, 3 touchdowns for Caleb Johnson. Kamari Moulton had 9 carries for 74 yards. Jazz Patterson, 10 carries for 56 yards. Oh, and by the way, Iowa's quarterback Brendan Sullivan added 58 ground yards with a touchdown. He was also 70% through the air, 93 yards through the air, had a touchdown pass. But this day was really about the rushing attack, and you knew it would be, right? We talked about this pre-game. In my preview, I brought up the disparity, really, with Iowa's rush offense versus Wisconsin's rush defense. And if you missed that preview, I'll give you these numbers again. Heading into this game, despite what your preconceived notions may have been about Wisconsin because of what that program historically is on the defensive side, Wisconsin came into this game 14th in rush defense. And of course, Iowa, the number 1 rush offense in the Big Ten. So you think, boy, there's an opportunity to take advantage. And you'd have to think Iowa identified that on tape and said, not just because of the numbers, but also because you're down to a very thin quarterback room. Not to say that the coaching staff at this point doesn't believe that Brendan Sullivan is the guy. I think they'd be foolish not to at this point. That's my opinion. But they were really thin. You could not afford to run Brendan. I mean, he carried the ball a little bit more than I would have expected, actually, the 58 yards, and got out of bounds when he could. But the point is, Iowa saw the ability to keep the clock moving, run the ball down Wisconsin's throat. They did that. They took advantage of one of the worst rush defenses in this conference. And Iowa, although its pass defense has not been up to snuff this year, heading into the game, Iowa was 11th in the conference in pass defense. Wisconsin much better in that category, 4th. Neither of these pass offenses really threaten you that much. At least we haven't seen an Iowa pass offense to this point that looks real threatening. We don't know what it could look like when Iowa's called upon to throw, but they were not called upon to throw tonight. So was I expecting a 32-point rout? No. I thought Wisconsin would be able to do better against the run than they did. All right. I did not expect, 4 guys to go 55 plus on the ground. That's ridiculous when you think about it. There's plenty of games in recent time where Iowa, and I'm not talking about this year, but in recent years, where Iowa's failed to have a single rusher hit 55 yards. Iowa for the day, 329 passing yards to 124 for Wisconsin. That box score, the team stats, you could really just flip. If you want to look at like past Wisconsin-Iowa matchups from like the last 10 years, at least 10 plus years, historically, they're completely flipped. Completely. Almost in every way imaginable. Now, the one difference right now with Iowa's offense, and again, we've yet to see how far Brendan Sullivan can take this team with the passing attack because they didn't need to tonight, but Wisconsin doesn't typically have a real mobile guy at quarterback. Iowa's got an opportunity now with Brendan Sullivan to make this offense not just good and elite on the ground, but really good collectively if they can utilize what they've got at quarterback through the air. And I think they've got a good one. Brendan made a couple of really nice throws. And had a bad throw early. We'll talk about it in that first quarter. He threw behind Jarrett Bowie. But I didn't really notice any other real bad decisions. I know he had the grounding penalty. Kind of a tough situation. I thought pass pro was below average at times. But, man, just overall, phenomenal performance by this Iowa offensive line, the Iowa backfield. That includes Brendan Sullivan. That includes the wide receivers. We saw guys like Jacob Gill. You can see why I think Gill is the best receiver on this team, not just because of his ability to run routes and catch, his ability to block downfield. Now he's got tremendous chemistry with his quarterback. And, boy, things were just rolling. And when's the last time we could say that Iowa scored 40 in 4 different games during a season, and we've still got several games left, 2 of which are against a couple of the worst defenses in the conference in UCLA and Maryland. Oh, and by the way, Nebraska gave up 50 to Indiana. So what could this offense do? That's yet to be, but what a day on the ground. And Iowa wins this one 42-10. If you're new to the show, folks, this is Iowa Postgame with Coach Don Patterson. I'm your host, Corey Bratta, here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. It would help me and it would help us, folks, if you right away hit that like button, just slide down, hit the thumbs up. I know I ask you this every week. Please do that. It would just take a couple of moments, and it would help us greatly in the algorithm. If you're not subscribed, we're here every week. I'm here every week through March, as we go through men's and women's hoops, and the regular season there is starting next week as well. So be sure you're subscribed, turn notifications on, but hit that like button, folks. It does help. Coach Patterson is en route back to his home base from Kinnick Stadium. He was there tonight for the blackout. He'll be joining us, and an appearance from On3 and Hawkeye Reports, Tom Kakert, following the press conference from Kirk Ferentz at Kinnick Stadium. So lots to get to. We've got our call line open. It's sponsored by Iowa Smokehouse. So let's go to our first Iowa Smokehouse caller of the day. We've got Mr. Alex here with us. Alex, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Corey. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm pretty good. Now, I will say this. Everything I just said was positive.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling, typically these shows last at least 2 to 3 hours. My guess is, and this is not me trying to be Debbie Downer, but because I've interacted with this fan base enough, and I'm a fan at heart myself, I'm almost certain there are going to be people tonight, at least one, probably more than one, that are going to come on here happy and yet ticked. And why are they going to be ticked, Alex? You know the answer.
It's the what ifs. What if we put Sullivan in at quarterback earlier in the season?
That's what it is. People can run away from it if they want. They can say, I enjoy this, you unappreciative little. I don't care. I mean, I'm not the one saying it. I'm just saying, don't judge other people for being frustrated. I understand. I get it. I mean, you don't think I was saying that at times during the game today? I mean, sure. We don't know. And you can't sit here as an apologist, as a Kirk Ferentz apologist, and say, well, yada, yada. You don't know, just like we don't know. Neither side knows. And you have every right to say, what if? I happen to believe in my little fantasy world that means nothing, that if Brendan Sullivan had played from week 1, Iowa would be at least one game better in the loss column. I think they'd still be in the race for the playoff, because I think 10-2 would still put them square in the mix. You can say I'm wrong if you want, but for one thing, I think if Iowa had played Sullivan in the red zone against Iowa State, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because they were up 13-0 at halftime. Had they had one more score in that first half, Iowa State's not coming back in that game. They went 2 for 3 red zone trips with 2 field goals against Iowa State. Ridiculous. And it was the next game. Let's not forget, it was the next game against Troy when Iowa made the adjustment. And kudos to Tim Lester. We don't know what Lester wanted to do. Maybe Lester wanted to make the switch prior to that. Maybe he wanted Sullivan all along. We don't know. So it's a stupid debate to have, but it is fair to say, what if?
Yeah. I have one more what if, is Deshaun Lee. Now, obviously, Jamari Harris is our best cornerback, and the second cornerback was always kind of up in the air. First, we played TJ Hall. He got beat by a bunch of Iowa State guys. Deshaun Lee comes in there. It looks, from what I could tell, it looks like he played fairly well. I don't recall ever seeing him coming out against Michigan State, like playing against Michigan State, unless it was only a couple drives. And we see tonight, I think he's our second best corner. And it's just like, why? And that's the other what ifs. Like, if he was out there for Michigan State, would the game been a little different? Now we can obviously bring up the Sullivan aspect of it. And even tonight, Sullivan was 7 of 10. But the couple things is, he had the one bad pass, this first pass to Jarrett Bowie behind him, okay. And then the intentional grounding, okay. But then you look at the one of the last passes he made to Ortworth, floated it right above the defender, caught it 50-plus yard pass.
And when's the last time we've said Iowa had a quarterback that threw over the top with touch? Like, think about even Nate Stanley, and I love Nate Stanley, right? Who doesn't miss the years of Nate Stanley from 2017 to 2019?
The one pass from Nate Stanley I remember was in Penn State. They had faked the run and TJ Hawkinson broke. No one's around him, and Stanley overthrew him. If you would have hit him, it would have been a touchdown. And I was, oh God, you're bringing up bad memories.
They've not had quarterbacks that have, and that's just one pass, right? Let's not make a mountain out of a molehill. But like that is it's been such a rare thing to see at Iowa, a quarterback who could do that. And we saw that from Brendan Sullivan today. So I'm with you. I totally understand. And I see the people as I'm scrolling through the chat here. Yeah, they're already here, and that's fine. But you're right about the first pass. I mean, I want to make sure people don't view me as some big Sullivan homer. That first pass was horrendous.
Oh yeah,
it was bad. Like when you're on the run and you throw it that far behind your receiver, ridiculous. However, we talked about leash. Remember, somebody asked me last show, how big of a leash, how long of a leash does Brendan Sullivan have?
I think it might have been me, probably a few other people.
It might have been you, and I think I said, well, if Cade's not available, he's got a real long leash. But at the same time, even if Cade had been available tonight, you're not pulling him after one or two bad throws. And also think about the moment. This is his first actual start. He knows Marco's not available. He knows Cade McNamara is not available. He knows James Rezar is not available. He knows his best, arguably his best overall target, Luke Lachey, is not available. And you're going into a blackout at night at Kinnick against maybe your biggest Big Ten rival. Might be a little nervous, right? You might be a little jittery. Now, he's settled down, but I'm just saying, like, horrendous first throw, but there was no need to panic at that point. I'm sure he did have some jitters, even though he's played big-time football before. Yeah. But by the way, no crowd he gets at Northwestern. Now, I don't know. He traveled places and played, but no home crowd at Northwestern.
It's different when you go to Kinnick as an opponent versus when you're in Kinnick as the home,
Sure, absolutely different experience.
And and it's just, we watched this game, and it was so refreshing to see a quarterback. I don't think he didn't take a sack. He got pressured. I mean, you can call the intentional ground. I think they usually tally that as a sack. I don't know. But outside of that one bad play, he kept plays alive. He put a Wisconsin jockstrap on the field. I mean, he was lucky to keep his balance and get extra yards. And then that touchdown, it wasn't a touchdown. He was down at the 1. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh. What if we go back to the what if? What if we had him in at the start of the season or near middle after Iowa State, whatever? What does this team look like? And I'm gonna when he was down at the 1, were you screaming at your TV? Because Iowa, I felt, got way too cute with the play calling.
They were up like, how many scores were they up at that point?
It was 28 to.
Game was over.
I think 28 to 10.
Game was over.
It was too cute for me. It was just like
I'll bet I didn't have a problem with it because the game's over at that point. I mean, the magic number, as Don always talks about, is usually 17. And against that Wisconsin offense versus that Iowa defense, I said it before the half. I said if they can score and make it a 3-score game before halftime, this game's over at halftime. And that's why I go back to Iowa State. And Iowa State's a different team. And I watched basically that entire Iowa State game today, watched them lose to Texas Tech. That's not a great Iowa State team. They're undefeated to this point, but that's not a great team. They've got really good wideouts, right? In Higgins and in Jalen Knoll.
No. Is it Knoll or Noel?
It's Knoll. But here's the problem. You're up 3 scores against that D. No way. And they found a way. But that's what I'm saying. Like, 3 scores did it. And I actually don't think it was a horrible pass by Sullivan on the slant to Seth Anderson. It was clear pass interference. So I thought Tim Lester just he called a phenomenal game, and it was clear they were going to stay conservative. It was clear from the get-go, and you could have guessed that was going to happen. I just don't think anybody anticipated Iowa would have this much success on the ground, because Wisconsin knew Iowa was going to keep it on the ground. They couldn't do anything about it.
No, and that interception by Nick Jackson, that you were probably obviously watching on TV. Did you hear the rules analysis saying it should have been a penalty because he kicked the ball?
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
No, and even the announcer was like, I don't agree with you on that one.
This is just like watching targeting in slow motion, and we all do it.
Yeah.
When you slow something down, it's going to look like he's intentionally kicking it, but there's no way an official, and they can't go back and call it later. There's no way an official in full speed is going to look at that play and say, I think he meant to do that. But, you probably saw me tweet it out, Alex. That play and this is the second week in a row, just made me think of Tyler Sash. And it's been
15, I remember you saying that, yeah.
It's been 15 years since his pinball interception
against Indiana.
Against Indiana. And it's just interesting. 15 years later, right around the same time, just I believe days after the 15-year anniversary of that pinball interception, this happens. I just think it's interesting.
Can we use the Iowa State argument that if Iowa plays Iowa State, we beat them?
I've been saying that since the day I've said that. I said that the day after, Alex. I said if they play 100 times, I think Iowa wins 75 to 80 of them.
Oh, it's the joke of like when Iowa beats Iowa State, and then Iowa State goes on a tear. You see on Twitter, Iowa State fans say, "Well, if Iowa played Iowa State, now Iowa State would crush them." So,
Iowa normally gets better as the season goes on. I don't know that State doesn't, but Iowa State has struggled to beat teams. Like, and Rocco Beck, give him credit, led them on a game-winning drive against Iowa, game-winning drive against UCF, nearly did it again tonight if the defense doesn't falter. But no, I mean, that's a game Iowa shouldn't have lost. And let me just, to all the people that thought they were throwing salt in my wound 2 weeks ago, I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to say it proudly. Michigan State is crap. Okay, they're crap. They're not any good. They're not any good. They got beat by 30-some today against Indiana. And Indiana's good, but they're sort of like Iowa State. I guarantee you, against Penn State, against Ohio State, against Oregon, they're going to get pounded. All right? Well, and we might find that out. You watch the Big Ten Championship game. You watch Indiana get pounded. I like Indiana. I like Cignetti. I love the storyline. That is not a good – Iowa had no business going to East Lansing and losing that game. They just didn't.
Indiana doesn't. I can't remember who they play next, but they play Ohio State. They don't play Penn State or Oregon at all this season. Can't remember who they play next.
Play Oregon in the title game.
Oh, they play Michigan next, and then they have a bye, and then they play Ohio State.
Yeah, so we don't know. I should say that because we don't know what's going to happen with Ohio State. But assuming they keep winning, I guess they'd have to beat Ohio State, or else win it with a tiebreaker. They're going to play Oregon.
I think when people talk about Michigan State being good, I think it's just it's like a defense mechanism. It's like, because we lost, like, Michigan State may not be a bad team. It's trying to protect ourselves because it's like we know the loss is bad. We're just trying to make ourselves feel better and say it's not a bad loss.
Because Michigan's not good, and Michigan beat Michigan State last week. So, anyways.
So, and then the last thing, and then I'll jump off. I obviously when we scored that Jazz Patterson touchdown, I think I like the future of the running back room, A, and B, I like the depth that we have at the line. I kept hearing two different names. Caden Piper.
It's Pieper.
It is Pieper. Okay. I like him. I think he's seen some more time in the line. I know when Bo Stevens was out, and if we get Luke Lachey back next week, I would like to think we will, because he was questionable for this game. I think he was kind of like a 50-50 ball, and we didn't need him, so which is good. And I think he'll be ready to go for UCLA, granted on a short week, but I don't know. I like the future for this Hawkeye team. I like the wide receiver room. I said it last week. I like the running back room. I like the old line. And
say what, it makes you feel a lot better. I was thinking about this during the game. They're losing a ton. Let's not sugarcoat this. They're losing so much. And I had a good friend of mine, I don't think Kyle will mind me repeat this. During the game, he was expressing some frustration about what I led with at the forefront, right? The whole premise of had Sullivan been playing the whole time, what would have happened? Let me just make this very clear. It's okay to say this was a disappointing season, because given the circumstances, they can win out, and I still think you still say that. I said heading into the year that 10-2 should be the floor of an expectation. Now, it wasn't a legitimate floor, clearly, but it should have been the floor of expectation given the schedule. And they had, given the roster, they had so many guys. Like, we are really going to miss Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, those guys side by side. We're really going to miss Sebastian and Harris and,
Schulte.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about the offensive linemen, right, that have become really solid run blockers. Schulte, you mentioned, I hope Entringer can fill in admirably. We'll see how they divvy up snaps between Entringer and assuming Xavier sticks around. And so anyways, it's just they lose a lot, but it makes you feel better when you look at the quarterback, right? And you see a guy who can move and create plays. It changes your perspective, even with the roster that's going to be somewhat of an overhaul. And with that being said, we welcome the man of the hour, none other than Coach Don Patterson. Coach, it was a little easier for you to get home today. I'm guessing maybe some people left early at when Iowa got up.
Some of them were. A few of them were in red and white also.
Yeah, well, I imagine. What was the? We didn't see many. I didn't see many red, much red clothing from the television. But usually, Wisconsin brings a pretty good crowd down for Madison. What was the? How many people do you think made the trip down?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It says a lot for Iowa and Wisconsin people that they have friends in the other state, because there were any number of people wearing red and white that were all over the stadium with their Hawkeye friends in most cases, of course. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had access to those seats. And then there were the usual sections of the visiting fans. But the bottom line, that stadium was almost all completely black. It was a tried and true blackout game, and our fans were really into it. I know you've already talked about crowd noise, I'm sure.
We have not talked about crowd noise. I'm glad you're bringing that up.
Well, it was disruptive, that's for sure. I am curious how it was explained on television in the early stages, where they suggested that we were marking out signals that mimics a snap count. Is that what they were saying?
It's interesting. It's one of my first notes. Well, it's actually my second note. Was it my second note? Yeah, just a very strange start. So you basically have 3 Wisconsin false starts on their first offensive drive, but 2 of them were called delay of game penalties on Iowa. And basically, I want to say the first one that was called against Jay Higgins, and he was basically he clapped, right? So he clapped on to basically signal to my understanding he's clapped, defensive line shifts, and that caused the Wisconsin O-line to jump. Now, I'm not a rules expert, but that's how I understood the explanation to be. Now, the second one was called on YA Black. I don't know what commentators basically said that's a bad call. That was a bad call. That was just a false start. And I just have never seen a series of I remember a few years back, the 2021 Penn State game with all the false starts on Penn State down in the north end zone. But that wasn't down in the north end zone. No. And that was more related to Iowa shifting and moving. And so, yeah, I mean, have you ever heard a series of calls quite like that in the first quarter?
Well, they will penalize you. As you mentioned, sometimes in short yardage, we'll line up and we will shift our front. You're allowed to do that. The only thing they've gotten us on is you can't bark out a command as far as identifying when to shift, because it sounds too much like the quarterback calling his signals. And in that regard, they can give you a delay for that.
Well,
but of course, if you want
clap, they identified it on the television broadcast as Jay Higgins clapping was what signaled
the crazy part there, of course, is Wisconsin didn't signal with a clap. Their quarterback never clapped, to my knowledge, all night.
Yeah.
Did he?
You would notice better than I would.
The usual way they were doing it, because of crowd noise, you'd see an offensive guard looking back at the quarterback to be sure he's ready for the ball, and then he taps the leg of the center and he snaps the ball. I don't believe they were using any kind of verbal command from the quarterback in general. Maybe sometimes they did, but sometimes for sure they did not. And the bottom line, if there's anything that sounds a little bit like the quarterback signals, they can flag you for delay a game as a defense.
Askabum with a super chat. He says, bro, admit Mason is good. It's time. Mason who? Mason Richmond? What are we talking about? What have I ever said Mason Richmond's not good? Have I ever said that on the show, Don?
we've always given him credit for being a sound and solid player.
Yeah, I think we've been critical of the offensive line over the past few years, but right now that O-line is run blocking exceptionally well. Don, first of all, can I get you to move your camera down a little bit? I just don't want to cover your face up at all by comments. Can I ask you about pass protection? Because we led with the dominance on the ground, not just from Caleb Johnson, but also from Kamari Moulton and from Jazz Patterson. And I'll throw the numbers there on the bottom of the screen. 135 yards for Caleb, 74 for Kamari, 56 for Jazz, not to mention 58 rushing yards for Iowa's quarterback and 7 from Caden Weegan. But how would you evaluate pass pro right now? It seems like there's still a lot of guys. Like Sullivan does such a great job evading pressure. It just felt like, especially first half, he was on the run too much.
Yeah, thankfully we were ahead of the chains. Incidentally, critical down conversions, if I'm not mistaken, I had it in front of me a while ago. I think we were something like 7 for 12 for the game. We were above 50% as an offense. Of course, the key there is to be in more short yardage than medium or long yardage. But bottom line, we did a good job of converting. So we didn't have a lot of obvious passing situations. I think in general, in those, of course, there's not very many plays that fall in that category where we actually were in long yardage and threw the ball. But I guess in general, we had a little leakage here and there. And he was forced to pull the ball down, and he still made something out of it in general. Had that one time, of course, where he got flagged for throwing the ball off the field. And he was out of the pocket, of course, but they deemed that the ball never made it to the line of scrimmage. And it's hard to measure that when you throw it up in the seats, of course. Maybe where it hits the seats, that's defined as its furthest point. So I don't know about pass pro. I didn't see anything really glaring. There were times maybe where we held the ball a little bit longer than what we'd planned. In general, the night went so smoothly that it's kind of hard to find anything to complain about.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you got a little better view than I did because you got so many commentary from the announcers, and of course, not to mention a replay of just about every play.
The only thing people are going to complain about tonight is, and they're out in droves. I knew they would be. I brought it up at the beginning because I knew they were going to be here. The people that are complaining about what if Iowa had made a quarterback change earlier in the year. And that's a fair question to have.